Denise Taylor, and welcome to this episode of the First Wives Club Love Talk. This platform is one where we talk about love with wives in mind. We bring to the table an opportunity of wives who have very different experiences to share what it's like to walk in their shoes. Today, I welcome my dear friend, Tonya Towne. Tonya has been in a long-standing interracial relationship. She's going to give us perspective and insight to what it is to walk in that marriage from her perspective. I thank Tonya for being open and transparent and sharing and letting us just get a glimpse of something we may not fully understand, especially if we've never dated interracially. Now, this episode is being brought to you by the First Wives Club Marriage Accountability Program. That's LoveWalk. LoveWalk is an opportunity for me as the accountability coach to come alongside you and help you grow personally so that you can soar relationally. A lot of baggage is what we bring into a relationship. Let me help you unpack that. Let me help you discover new ways that you can love, appreciate, and feel motivated to go forward in your marriage relationship. Now, on the 25th of every month, that's the deadline for the next month's cohort. So as we approach that day, think about participating. Visit us online at firstwivesclub.live/lovewalk to learn more. The next cohort starts at the beginning of the next month, so please don't miss out. I would love to be your coach. I would love to help you get to the point where you feel confident about yourself and your relationship. So see me online, and don't forget to see this great episode where Tonya helps us discover more about love from an interracial relationship. Hello, Tonya. Thank you so much for being with us on Love Talk. I am so excited that you agreed to have this conversation. And I know it's one that's going to be great because we've been trying to have it for a couple of months now. So somebody else is going to be blessed by you being willing to talk about your experience. I met you many years ago. I was thinking back, our girls were like 13 years old, and now they're young adults. So I know that you and Steve have had a long relationship. You guys dated when interracial dating probably wasn't cool. If it is cool, I don't know that it's cool. But you found love in a very unique and different way at a very early time when those types of relationships coming together probably were a little difficult. And when I look at the makeup of the First Wives Club, this is definitely something that's going to resonate with women who are wives and married to someone from a different culture. I even have people from different countries who have to blend their experiences. So thank you for being open to talk about this.
Absolutely.
And before we get going, please share a little bit about your family.
Okay. Well, I'm married to Steve Towne, and we've been together for about 27 years. Wow. Married, it'll be our 23rd wedding anniversary this September. So yeah, it's been quite a while.
It really has been a while.
Yes. And then we have two amazing daughters. One is 21 and the other one is 17. My 21-year-old just graduated college, and my youngest will be a senior next fall in high school. Steve and I met long time ago. Actually, the first time I met him is while I was a senior in high school, and I was a babysitter for some mutual friends because I was in a co-op program at my high school, and I had worked for the bank. And we worked in the HR department, our mutual friend, and she had a daughter and she needed a babysitter. So I offered to come babysit. And so they were all older than me. Steve's about 4 years older than me. Mm-hmm. And I would come over to babysit, and they were all old enough to go out to the bars. And so that's how I met him the first time. But, you know, he was much older than me, so I didn't think anything of it. Went away to college. Of course, I had a boyfriend. And I'd say when I came home from college one year, my boyfriend and I had broken up. And I connected with my friends again, and I told them that I actually thought that Steve was kind of cute. And they said, well, he's always thought you were cute. And I was like, really? Well, why didn't you let him know what I think and then give him my number? So he actually called me and we connected, really well. And he set up a date. So we went out on a date, and things seemed to be moving kind of fast. And I say within 2-3 months, I had moved into his apartment, and I transferred schools because I had been going to Whitewater at that time, and I transferred to UW Milwaukee. And kind of worked and, went to school at the same time while we were, working on this relationship. And it wasn't foreign to me, this whole relationship thing, as far as interracial relationships, because that's what I grew up around. My mother was married to a white man who was my stepdad, and they were married when I was 9 years old. So I was always raised that way. So when I came across this relationship with Steve, it wasn't like, oh, I need to be with a white man, and this is something that was new to me. No, it was not foreign to me at all. However, it was my very first interracial, serious interracial relationship. Prior to that, I had dated mostly, Black men, also Hispanic, one Asian, man before, or young man at that time. But Steve was really the first serious relationship, that was truly interracial relationship. And my experience when I was growing up with interracial relationships is, what I saw in my stepdad was a very caring man. The fact that he took on a household with, a mom who had 3 children, and he raised all of us, as if we were his own, because my dad, my biological father at the time, didn't have an active role in my life, not until I became an adult. But I saw him as very hardworking, honest, genuine. He was just committed to us. But the other side that I saw is that my mom was very dominating, and he would do everything to please my mom. And I didn't see that, he challenged her a lot. And as I was growing up, I became a little bit more protective of him. And they would get in arguments, and then I would, speak out of turn, as a teenager, and say something that I probably shouldn't have said, butting in your business. But I felt bad for him. And I said in the back of my mind at that time that I never wanted to be with a man who wouldn't challenge me. Someone who would, not always say yes to me. And immediately I found that in Steve. My other relationships, yes, the guys would challenge me. However, I wanted someone who had the same values that I did, going in the same direction as far as our future, where I wanted to go. And I wasn't getting that in some of the other relationships I was having. I'd come across the situations where I dated someone and he had previous children from another prior relationship from a young age, or I had the relationships where guys cheated on me. But the relationship I had right before, Steve, was with a Black male. And it's where I started to open my eyes to how I should be treated he started to open my eyes as how I should be treated as a female. Just spent a lot of time with me, was very nurturing, although he did have a child from an existing relationship. I just didn't see that as a problem because, I was so focused on him and he was all about me. Until in our relationship, he said that he made a decision that he was going to try to work things out with the mother of his child. And, I respected him for that. I really respected him for that, because he could have just cheated on me and not said anything and just gone on the charade, but that didn't happen. And he was very honest and upfront with me, and we went our separate ways. And then that's when I had come back and I decided that, I was going to try to make something work with, Steve. And my ex-boyfriend didn't like that at all, being that he was a Black man and he happened to see us out at a bar one time. And then I started getting the phone calls saying, okay, what are you doing? You can't do this. He's a white man. What are my boys going to think? It suddenly became all about him. And I said, it's really not about you. I said, you made your decision. You wanted to go work things out with your mom, and I respected you for that because you honored me by telling me the truth. And he said, well, things aren't working out. So you and I, can try to work things out together again. And I told him, well, I've moved on, and I want you to respect my relationship and my decision going forward. And eventually he did, do that. He actually ran into us again in another bar, and he actually walked up to Steve and introduced himself.
Really?
Yes, and he said some kind words, and that was the last that we had really heard of him, from that point on. And I would say that my experiences, like with other Black men, seeing, me with Steve at that time, again, I had never really been exposed to like major issues or seeing issues with my mom and dad or stepdad when I was coming up. And I never really experienced any issues with people like being confrontational or, saying, what are you doing with him? Outside of that conversation that I initially had with my ex-boyfriend, because we would go to places, and some Black men, there was a couple that came up to Steve and said, you got a, good one on your arm, make sure you take care of her, being very complimentary. My family was very welcoming, to Steve, so much so that I had great cousins and cousins that would introduce him when we go somewhere before they introduced me. They would say, here's Steve, this is my cousin, and that's his wife, Tonya. So, but I never saw it as a problem. My family never, saw it as a problem. That was one side of it. And then with Steve's family on the other side of it, I wasn't his first interracial relationship. He had one other relationship with a Black female right before me. And he also had a Hispanic relationship before. He's also dated white women before. So, but it wasn't something that was foreign to his family either. And when I was brought into the situation, I never once had any issues with anyone in his family. In fact, I probably have one of the best mother and daughter-in-law relationships that I've seen from anyone, because I'm very close with, his mom, very close. And she's from day one always treated me that way, like I was her daughter. And people would, when I say people, friends, certain family members would make comments like, well, Steve isn't like typical white people, he's, Steve. And I go, what does that mean? They're always kind of sat in the back of my mind, but, what does that mean? I just saw him as a regular person. He had the same values as I did. You're honest, you treat others as you want to be treated. And I don't want to say he doesn't look at color, because he knows his woman is, Black, and he loves all of my features and everything about me. But he looks at your character totally through and through and through. And that's how he's going to judge you. And that's how I wanted everyone to kind of look at him. And it's not, he's a white man, he's with this Black woman. We never raised our children, that way either. Although we were very frank and upfront with them and letting them know that, everyone doesn't, think like us. So you may experience some things. But I never once had a very bad experience at all where people were judging us, based on, the content or, the color of our skin, the fact that we were in a interracial relationship. Even going back to his grandmother, and when you think about their age, like his grandmother, who died at 101, was awesome. And anytime she would see me, would give me the biggest hugs and kisses. And his mom's mom was very welcoming to me as well. Now, there was one family member that Steve had made me aware of before I even met her. And he said, what I want you to know is that in my prior relationship with the other Black female I was with, he had an aunt who was, she's extremely liberal. She's a teacher, and he was surprised at her comment that she made to him one time. She told him that when she met his girlfriend, what you're doing, is wrong. You being with a Black woman, that's wrong. And he said, so, I don't know how she's going to react when she meets you, we'll have to see. Because I was surprised when she made that comment, and he was like, what are you talking about? I'm going to be with this person, you know, regardless of what you think. And then he never heard anything else from her about that. So, you know, I had that, he prepared me, and I had that in my mind, and it came to time where I did meet her. And I just treated her as any other person, you know, when I'm first meeting them. And this was not the person that he described to me at all. She was completely open and honest with me and just genuine. There were no issues as far as, you know, color. We had like the best relationship, close, and she's very close with my daughters when they were born. And I told Steve, I said, even years into our relationship, I'm like, I don't see this person. He was like, I don't know why she made that comment years ago, but how she is with you is not how she was with the other, his ex-girlfriend. So I never understood that. Perhaps maybe I could have opened up and had a conversation with her about that. It had nothing to do with me.
No, I think part of it probably was the character of who you are as a person. And I think that that's something that I want to take a few minutes to make sure I express and understand, because as an African American woman on the outside looking into an interracial relationship, sometimes people have a mindset like, well, she's not down for the cause, or she, you know, like you're tainted in some way, if that could be a thing or mean a thing. But I have had many afternoons in the stands with Tonya all day long as our children are playing volleyball from sun up to sundown across the seasons. And I never felt any vibe of sellout. I've never felt like you've compromised yourself as a person, as a woman, as an African American woman. I felt very free and open to express myself, felt very free and open in your home, around your family, around his family, your family, and had a chance to have an up close personal view of how what you just described came to life, which is everybody came together, and there were just all dynamics of type of people who were there and very open and accepting, while at the same time you were still a genuine African American woman. And I don't think that you in any way have discounted that about yourself. So that's my personal perspective from having been a friend of yours for over these years. I think what your aunt what his aunt probably saw was your character, like who you genuinely are as a person, as you've expressed here, and how welcoming his family was to you, how welcoming your family was to him. I think it speaks to the personalities that probably have drawn the two of you together, especially when I hear you talk about you value the same things. Your values were in the same places. And it sounds like that was more of a draw beyond you just saying, oh, I'm looking for this certain type of guy, or him saying, I'm looking for this certain type of girl. I think when you said I liked him, it probably had nothing to do with the color of his skin.
Nothing at all.
He impressed you in a different way, and love kind of grew from that. So let's talk about that love growing process, right? You know, because that's going to be true across any relationship.
Right.
How did you see it in that bud form that you knew, hey, there's something about this guy I like?
Right. Well, with us being, and it's been so long, but he listened to me. He listened to me. Now, I come from a background where I came with some baggage, right? Because my relationship with my mother is, you know, it's non-existent now. And she was very, as I mentioned before, very dominating over my stepdad, but she was like that with all of us as well. I felt that I was a little sheltered at times. I come from a background where there was molestation as well. And things that a mother should do for their daughter and be there for their daughter didn't happen for me, unfortunately. And I had not, as a young adult, dealt with those things going into my adulthood, because one, I had been hiding a lot of that. and not sharing with anyone what had occurred to me, what I had experienced until, you know, it had come to a boiling point. And it was after I had my first daughter. But Steve had been there with me. He was the only one that I was sharing bits and pieces with as it was coming along. And he was helping me to build me up, to make me stronger, until it got to the point where we needed better tools to help me deal with those emotions, so that I could be a better mother. And eventually I did go to therapy and I got counseling for it, you know, but with my husband's support. And I knew that even before we had gotten married, that there was something special about him, because he didn't run, even though he knew that I had some baggage, but he was ready to be there for me. And whenever he said he was going to do something, he did it. And that was another thing. You know, he was true to what he said. And that was another thing I had not experienced consistently a lot as I was with my relationships and as I was growing up. People being there for you and you being able to depend on them when, you know, they tell you they're going to do something. And I experienced that with him, and that was new for me, and I liked it. I liked the feeling that I had inside. And the more that he gave that to me, the more and more I wanted him, the more in love I started to fall, you know, with him. And then we decided that, you know, it was very important for us to live together. And I think that's why things started moving so fast, because I'm a strong believer in really knowing someone, you know, before you make that commitment, you know, of marriage. This marriage is very, very important to me. And so we decided to get a house together. And then once we had done that, I knew that, you know, hey, we're going to be together forever. And, you know, this is the man that I want to marry. We had talked about, you know, kids, you know, what would it be like bringing, you know, biracial children into this world. And at first we were on the fence, because we're like, this world is kind of crazy. You know, people are acting kind of ridiculous, you know. So we talked at that time about Social Security not being around for anyone. And do we want to bring kids into this type of world? But then, you know, the more we talked about it, we're like, well, why wouldn't we? We're both good people. You know, we actually should be reproducing. You know, so, and I just knew that this is the guy that I wanted to be with for the rest of my life. And because my family loved him so much, it was just so easy. It was so organic. You know, my brothers loved him. He was just him when he's around my family and friends. He was so natural and genuine, that everyone just gravitated towards him. I mean, wherever we went. And as you experienced, like at the volleyball matches, Steve would be around walking and talking to everyone. He just knew everybody, you know, when it came to volleyball. But that's his personality in general. And it's another reason why I just fell in love with him, because me being so introverted, I was sheltered, and things that I had experienced, that too was new for me, because he was so open and he could just talk to anyone. And I learned a lot of that from him as I was getting older and, you know, becoming the woman that I wanted to be, and with finishing school, and he was there on my side. He just made me stronger. And like I said, the more that he gave that to me, the more in love that I fell with him, you know, and I said, this is it.
And everything you shared transcends ethnicity, right?
Oh, yeah.
Those are the core things that make harvesting a love relationship great. And if you can find that, then I would say you have something far more valuable, regardless of its packaging that it comes in, so that you can really go the distance and grow old together. And you were able to make that connection with him. Thank you for sharing your experience too, Tonya. I appreciate
You're welcome.
that.
Absolutely.
I know that those types of topics are very sensitive. So clearly you have made a leap forward, because I'm sure 20 years ago, it would not have been so easy to talk about what it was growing up with those types of dynamics. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely.
You know, you touched upon something, because despite you guys coming together and gelling as well as you have, you did have children who needed to understand themselves, right? Who needed to understand both facets of what you guys brought. Tell me about those conversations and how you helped them to not only understand each of you and what great characteristics you brought to the table, but how to find their own identity
Right.
as well.
Absolutely. Well, one, I was very good about making sure that they had exposure to both sides of the family, the good and the bad. I have my crazy aunt, you know, she'll take them and walk them to Aldi, for good old things, and I have that experience because that's what she did with me when I was younger. And, the family members we're going on to Chicago, and visit with my great aunt, and she's going to make some fried chicken and gravy and rice whenever we come down there, and just good, wholesome, Black soul food, and the girls being around that love. So I always made sure that they got that exposure as well as the exposure from Steve's family side. But you can see it was a nice mix. And as they were growing up, the girls really never, because when children are young, they truly don't see color. It's all about the folks' character at that time and what can you do for them, and they value friendships. But as they got a little older, junior high, middle school, kids are taught certain things by family members or their parents. And so they become a little bit more exposed to certain things and words and people say. And I would say it wasn't until really high school that they started, hearing folks use the N word, or, white people use the N word. And, it was twofold. Sometimes white people use the N word and they just use it as like a term of endearment. And I'm like, oh, really shouldn't be using that at all. No one really should. But the girls never came to me with this identity issue. I don't know if I'm Black. I don't know if I'm white. And I think that's partly because of the fact that we exposed them to both sides, and they felt good about themselves because they had so much exposure to both sides. Now, their environment for school and things of that nature, obviously it's in predominantly white schools. But again, the girls would gravitate to whomever, had similar values, wanted to have a good time with them or be their friends. So even though it's predominantly white, they would have friends from all mixes. There were some Black kids that went to the school, and of course they would, befriend or be friends with, other Black children that are at the school as well. But again, predominantly white children that they were around, in school. But they never really had any issues with identity and trying to determine what side they belong to. It was never really about that. What they struggled with a little bit was some of the white people using the N-word. Morgan had a very bad experience. My oldest had a very bad experience with a boy she was dating, and it was a little later in her high school years, and he seemed really nice. He came over here to our house and everything. And I guess he must have gotten some slack from like an ex-girlfriend about her, dating Morgan. And he ended up calling her the N-word in like they were breaking up or something. And he called her the N-word. Well, typically I don't get involved in that kind of stuff, but I happen to know his family and his parents. And I mentioned to them, and they were just livid, absolutely livid that he said this. And how it came to be is because it was a little bit of peer pressure. His ex-girlfriend was really jealous of the fact that, here Morgan was, Black, and he had been dating her, and she had been giving him a hard time, and he just succumbed to the peer pressure. So we gotten past that. He apologized and everything. Morgan just moved on, and, she just never spoke to him again. But she was really bothered, by the fact that here she really trusted this person, showed, him a lot of, she was very genuine with him. And for him to turn on her and then call her something that was so ugly, she just didn't understand that. But I was really happy at how quickly she bounced back from that. It didn't like put her in a negative light or say that, or change her perspective about all white people because she had that one bad experience. She just moved on, literally, and just dealt with it, as she moved forward. But McKinley had, similar issues where she would hear people saying the N-word schools. And I think they got to the point where, it seemed like it was becoming commonplace because, we had both sides doing it. There were Black kids that allowed, some of the white kids saying the N-word around them because they were buddies and cool. My girls have a different take on it. They don't think that you should be using the word at all, but they just kind of moved on. It hasn't really affected them negatively, where they feel that they can't go to school or, they have an identity crisis because of it. But we would have those conversations with them and let them know that, again, you treat others as you want to be treated. And that was really the golden rule that we had, as they were growing up. And we just really kept reinforcing it as they, had gotten older. But I suppose if we had more issues where the girls were exposed to someone like race issues, calling them out of their name constantly. And we didn't have a lot of that, primarily because the kids that they were hanging around were all cool kids and didn't care about that kind of stuff. It was just these little pockets of issues here and there. And it wasn't anything major that really affected them negatively that changed their one opinion about one race versus the other. But I think, like I said, just the golden rule that we kept telling them, treat others as you would want to be treated. And, judge people, by the color of their skin. That was big with us. And we just reinforced that with the girls.
So, I would imagine, and it sounds that you were really blessed to have the right chemistry happen the right way. But I would imagine that there are probably some wives who are sitting in this seat. I've read a couple of blog posts about, wives who are white, who are married to Black men, who are really trying to understand this experience they're going through. And then obviously you're Black and you're married to a white guy. What advice do you have for couples who are faced with trying to have some perspective of acceptance and understanding, who may be running into challenges, though you didn't have a lot and your exposure was great? I'm sure you are not ignorant to what I'm talking about in terms of those dynamics.
Right.
What advice would you have for them?
For me, it always boils down to communication. I always felt that you never look at a situation as immediately, oh, it's because I'm Black, oh, it's because I'm white. Get to the root of the issue. What's really the problem? And 9 times out of 10, it's about communication. Someone hasn't listened to someone else and tried to understand their perspective. And it would also depend on what the situation is. But for me, it should never be about, the color. You have to understand what is truly the root of the issue. I think it's easy for people to say, oh, it's because I'm Black, oh, it's because I'm white. That's real easy to default to that versus looking at and trying to identify what the root of the issue is.
Yeah. And communication and being open to listen, I think, is important too, because sometimes we listen to just respond, right? We don't really listen to understand what's going on with that person or why they may be saying what they're saying or where they're potentially coming from. It just seems like there's so many different dynamics and layers that we kind of pass through and don't have a clear view that someone who is coming from different backgrounds may run into, right? Because I may have been raised this way, which might be a cultural norm for me that may be going against how you're raised. And I agree with you, communication is definitely the center of how we solve all marital problems practically. But any other things that you think they may be dealing with that bears any other advice that you can think of?
And again, it's probably falling back on communication. Knowing and understanding your partner's needs. The other thing, like I mentioned before, what I had been exposed to as I was coming up with my mom and her husband is she was very dominant over him. And I never saw that she was, nurturing towards what his needs are, what his concerns were, because it had to be her way. And what I've learned is that, in my relationship with Steve, is to understand what his needs are and to respect those and try to nurture those as well, as he does for me. It's gotten so organic to the point that, he knows exactly what I'm thinking before I even say it, and vice versa, because I take time to understand and listen, to what he needs, or watch him and look at him and see what makes him happy, what makes him tick, and just focus on that and try to foster that. For me, that's been the biggest thing, just understanding your partner, knowing what their needs are, what ticks them off, what buttons, you shouldn't push. Those have been very, very, big components of our relationship in making it last so long, the communicating and understanding the needs.
That's perfect, because I can say the same is true, right? The more I invest there, the more I see returns. The more that I spend time really trying to understand where he's coming from and take time to listen to him, and really get a grasp on his needs, like you're saying, the better it feels. And I agree with you. I think that all of that transcends any type of relationship. And it all goes back to how we really take time to love one another.
Right.
And I think it's beautiful. And again, I just applaud you.
Thank you.
You're like almost 30 years into this. Like you're as they say. you're OG in the ranks of it all. And you talk about it so seamlessly as if it was easy. And I know it wasn't. And I know that you've gone places and you've seen the looks, but you've managed to be mature enough to get past it because you were invested in your relationship. I know that, everything hasn't been easily understood, that you've shown up to a company party and somebody didn't know you and it was unexpected to them because they didn't have a clue. And so I don't think you're discounting those.
No.
They just didn't have a role in distorting what was the glue for you guys.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. And I see those type of situations as, and especially if, you get the eye rolling or something, that person has a problem. Sounds like a personal issue. It's not with me or Steve. And I'm able to easily move on from that. And sure, there were a couple of times, yes, we go to, a company party and they didn't know. But from that first instance that it happened, it was actually even before we were married, because of course I took them, to company parties before we were married. But after that, and then after we were married, I always made sure that, wherever I was at, in my office there, I always had photos up of me and my husband, was never going to be an issue again. So everyone always knew, so it would never be questioned. What I did experience as a Black female and working in those type of environments is that many times when people talk to me on conference calls, I have to assume that they don't realize that I'm an African-American female until I meet them in person. And then some people just don't realize their verbal cues and physical cues that are going off because they meet you and their eyes are really big and they're shaking your hand. And I'm like, okay, well, clearly this person didn't know, I was an African-American female. So I would experience those type of issues. But when people already knew, because I put it out there that I'm married to a white man, it was a non-issue, a non-issue. Yeah. But I think that was for me learning. I didn't want to be put in a situation where I walked into a room and people didn't know that my significant other, was white. And that's how I, curb that by putting it out there before anyone could find out.
Right. Because then that releases the pressure valve, right? That helps him to understand and know that you're coming in and I already got this covered. And he's going to be like, oh,
Yes,
giving the
exactly.
love,
Exactly.
you're gonna,
Exactly.
you're gonna already have the awareness. So that, in fact, is a really great tip, especially for someone. You don't want them to get the surprise element, because you don't want your spouse walking into that, because they
Right.
you don't know how they'll be received. But informing that up front is very, very, very good. So
Right.
thank you so much, Tanya. I am so excited that this conversation happened. Before we close out, I always like to have people just tell us their one wife wisdom. You've got nearly, what you say, 23 years coming up.
Yes.
What's your one wisdom? We talked about communication, so you can't say that one, but
Oh,
what wisdom would you give to this generation of wives that are hoping to get to 23 years? What would you say?
for me, someone always has to compromise. Be willing to compromise. Be willing to compromise. I had to learn that through this relationship because only what I had been exposed to. But I learned through this relationship that compromise will get you further in the relationship. And whether that's me or my husband, someone has to be willing to do it. And if you see that one is being a little bit more pig-headed, then hey, you take a step back and look at the bigger picture.
Yep, that's a good one. Yep, that is very good. So thank you, Tanya. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I thank Tanya for being so open and transparent in sharing about her marriage and her relationships. Her experiences are something that many of us have also shared. I am glad that she took the journey to grow personally. I think that is one of the critical reasons why she and her husband are soaring together. That path of personal growth allows us to get open and available for relational growth. This is what the Love Walk program is all about. This Love Walk program will help you make that journey to personal growth so that you can indeed soar relationally. So be sure to visit us online to learn more about Love Walk. And again, I thank Tanya for her openness. I hope that you were able to make a connection. And I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Love Talk. Denise Taylor signing off.